Hey there, welcome back. So imagine you're enjoying a prix meal at a trendy upscale restaurant. It isn't cheap, but it's more like a guided culinary experience. By the time the creme brulee is served, you're more than stuffed. You briefly consider passing, but what the heck? You're paying for it anyway, and you've already blown your diet.
Been there, done that.
How about this? Imagine you pay $100 for a ticket to a championship basketball game. And on the day of the game, there's a massive snowstorm. Would you still go? Now, what if the ticket cost you nothing? Maybe it was a gift. Would you be more or less likely to skip the game? Most people would be more likely to go to the game if they paid for the ticket, even though the decision should be based on the weather. Choosing to watch a terrible movie because you paid $10 to see it, or keeping an incompetent employee on staff because you've invested a year training them. These are all examples of sunk cost fallacy in action. Perhaps the most famous example of sunk cost was the Concorde, a supersonic airplane that could travel from New York to London in around 3.5 hours at twice the speed of sound. Now, the Concorde was initially estimated to cost about $100 million, but shortly after its launch, it became clear that was a gross underestimation. It was a financial failure, costing $2 billion before launching in 1976. Yet, British and French governments continued to fund the airliner, despite numerous warnings that it was a colossal disaster. Let's face it, we've all been there. You know, when you've invested time or money or effort into something, whether it's a project or a relationship or a terrible movie. Deep down, you know it's past its sell date.
I know exactly what you mean.
But instead of cutting your losses and moving on, you stick with it, convincing yourself that you've already put in so much, it would be such a waste to give up now.
That's crazy, wacky, mixed up.
You know, we often make decisions based on what we've already invested, even as the probability of our expected outcome gets closer to zero.
How do you explain that lapse in judgment?
There are two psychological forces at work. One is loss aversion. This is a cognitive bias that describes why the pain of losing is psychologically twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. The other is cognitive dissonance, which explains our tendency to justify and rationalize our decision to continue, even though we know we should move on. Dopamine also plays a role here. The greater the cost of achieving a reward, the larger the dopamine hit. So, how do we avoid falling into the sunk cost trap? For all the geeky goodness behind sunk cost fallacy and a few simple ways to beat it, check out my recent post. And the next time you find yourself clinging on to something simply because of what you've already put into it, remember, sunk costs are sunk for a reason.